I think that this world with the current Me Too era is a prime example of why it's so complicated. There's so many people who are thinking that one thing is okay and others that aren't, and there's so often we're in different areas, different directions on consent. So yeah, absolutely, I think it's very complicated, complex.
I think a great place to start with this, Dan, is this whole idea of consent preferences. And that's something that we never talk about, right? The consent is consent. You're either consenting or you're non-consenting. But what's true is that we actually have consent preferences, which is the way we ask for consent and respond to consent. And Dan and I were recently at a Quad S meeting, now it's almost a year ago, where they talked about consent preferences. And what I thought was so interesting, Dan, was that most of us like to consent. Our consent preference is nonverbal.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about Quad S. Quad S is a Society for Scientific Study of Sex. And so it's a bunch of basically sex nerds, PhDs, doctors, that get together and study different aspects of sexuality. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you're referring to is that one study that we were privy to that was talking about the sexual preferences, consent preferences that people had. And usually it was nonverbal, which was surprising.
So to help people understand what nonverbal consent looks like, I love the example that many of us have from our youth. So let's pretend Dan and I are 15. And he asked me to go to the movies with him. And it's our first date. And we're sitting in the movie theater and it gets dark. And what's the first move that Dan might do?
Let's see, you're this way. Unfortunately, my arm doesn't go through the screen. But...
Right. So it's the old arm reach around, right? Mm-hmm. And then he's going to be waiting for a nonverbal consent. And so some of the ways that people do nonverbal consent, so he did the outreach, like I'm asking, nonverbally, I want to put my arm around you. I want to cuddle up, will you be my girl, right? And I might have one of two responses. One is I may lean back into his arm and I don't move away. I don't shrug off. I don't shake him off. I don't reach for my lipstick or pretend to grab my Diet Coke. And so I lose his arm, which would be a way of showing that I wasn't consenting. I might even be so bold as to remove his arm. But basically, whether that arm stays on me or not is a way that many women or other people will show consent. Now, that doesn't always work because it can be confusing, and that's where we're getting in a lot of trouble right now, is because most of us are using nonverbal consent, and in the Me Too movement and in the world at large, nonverbal consent doesn't work very well. Because let's say I froze.
Right.
Maybe I've had some sexual trauma and I just get scared. Oh my God, this big tall guy is putting his arm around me. And I freeze with my popcorn. Now, Dan may think that may mean that he can now put his other arm on my leg. I still don't move. I'm frozen. He's hearing, hey, it's cool. She likes this. But inside, I'm not consenting, I'm frozen, and I'm not communicating. And that's one of the ways consent is very complicated. because our nonverbal cues aren't always aligned.
Yeah. Yeah, they talk about the limbic system of the brain is what kind of controls that. So the fight, flight, freeze, or fuck. Keep hearing it as the 4 Fs. So if you either fight, so you take the arm and you throw it off, or you freeze and you're sitting there still, and the person who's moving forward with this doesn't necessarily know what is right or wrong and thinks that, oh, well, this is okay, I should keep going. And fight, flight, freeze, the flight would be to leave, or fuck is to accept it and move forward with it and go on. But that's also a way of not necessarily conforming, but trying to make sure that you're protecting yourself. If somebody were to come at you and you kind of give in to them, so they're not going to cause any more harm to you. That's something that could be happening as well. So it's really difficult.
And
also,
so
I wanted to throw out there real quickly for those of you who are online, if you would like to submit a question, you can do so in the attendee chat box. If you want to do something that's private, then you can email Morgan at centerforhealthysex.com, and he will rewrite it and post it up there so you will be completely anonymous. Sorry, just wanted to throw that in there quickly.
Fabulous. We would love people to ask us questions. So the biggest problem we're having right now as a society is the consent preference of our society is nonverbal. Nonverbal consent is really hard because we're not mind readers, and there's a lot of, as you just, right, a lot of open to interpretation. So I may think she's okay or he's okay, he's not okay, or he is okay. And so we have to bring our voices to consent, and that can feel really awkward for a lot of people. And one of the ways that it can feel awkward is, well, it doesn't feel sexy if I'm going to talk about it.
Or there's a lot of shaming around it. Mm-hmm. If I'm to verbally say, wow, I'd really like you to put your arm around me, or not, then what's that going to say to the person who's doing it? Like, I don't want you to do it, so people take it personally, or do they think that I'm a slut, I'm easy, I want them to call me, I really like this person, but maybe I'm being too forward or not. It's verbal communication is really difficult. And in the study that we saw, I think it was in the area of 70% of people, or maybe even higher than that, 78% of people use nonverbal consent as their method for consenting.
Right, which is why we have a lot of problems.
Right.
And you would think it'd be so easy just to say something like, I'd like to give you a hug. Or how would you feel about me holding your hand? And yet, we work with a lot of women, Dan. So at Back to the Body Sensuous Retreats for Women, consent is a really big deal for us because we work in somatic ways and we work with touch, and consent is very, very important to us. And what many of the women tell us is that verbalizing their desires is probably the number one most difficult thing for them. Part of it is they don't even know what they want.
Right.
So how can they consent to something they don't know if they want it or not? It's not even in their bodies. So until something happens to them, they don't know if they want it or they don't want it. And that happens to a lot of people in the dating world. And what was mentioned here was even in the BDSM world, play world. Well, how do I know, what you've got in that bag? And I'm curious and I want to play with you. But if I just give you blanket consent, right? I don't know if you're going to bring like a rattlesnake out of that bag.
A rattlesnake? Where'd you pull that one out?
Well,
Yeah,
people
so that's
say,
absolutely true.
mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that's absolutely true. When you're starting to play with somebody in the BDSM world, you get into a scene and you don't necessarily know who this person is, then what is it that they're going to pull out of their bag of tricks? Are they into electricity? Are they into flogging or single tails? Or the list goes on of what is available out there for people to do. And how do I know what I may be interested in or not interested in? There's a movement out there right now. See, you're getting non-consensual touch right now.
I am getting non-consensual touch right now, and he doesn't really care.
So there's this kind of movement that's going on out there that says yes, no, maybe. And yes means yes, no means no, and maybe means no also. And one of the problems with that is when you get into those kinds of situations where you don't necessarily know what's going on, you can't be an enthusiastic yes necessarily. It's like, well, gee, I don't know about that. I've never tried that before. But what I think you can do is you can be an enthusiastic yes to the exploration of what's going on. But you can't ever be a true yes if you don't know how to say no. So if you know your no is not a no, then you never know your yes is going to be a yes. And so I think that that can also be difficult too.
I love this quote from Adori. And what she says is, you can consent to the adventure, but you don't consent to the outcome. And I think that's where our yeses and our nos become even more important. So there's this idea of consensual non-consent. Okay, so Dan, we go to a club and I say to you, I don't want you consenting me every 30 seconds. Like, here are my boundaries. You lay them out in front. So no rattlesnakes. Definitely no rattlesnakes. And maybe there are a couple of other no's, like I don't want blood. I don't want humiliation. And you set that out ahead of time, what my yeses and my nos are. But then I don't want to have to be consenting every 30 seconds because that's not fun for me. Mm-hmm. So I'm consenting in advance to the scene, right? But that's where the safe words come in. That's where the safe words come in, and you decide those ahead of time. And really what those safe words really mean are yes, no, slow down, right? It's pretty simple. I mean, that's why people generally use the universal red light, green light, 1, 2, 3, right? Red light, stop. Whatever you're doing, no matter what it is, you stop immediately. Yellow is slow down. And green to me is usually not necessary because happy sounds are happening, right? But right. Green exists. Do that more. Green, green, green. That's a good way for a lot of people to work with consent, even if it's not in a BDSM realm. Because it's very, very clear. We use it at Back to the Body, even though we're not in a dungeon, right?
Sorry, I was responding to somebody's comment. Yes.
And what was that comment?
Oh, so they said, thanks, some very good explanations about how sexual tensions may be misunderstood by a potential initiator or receiver if two people do not literally verbalize their thoughts.
It's really sticky, isn't it?
Totally. So going back to the body retreats and what we do, I know, so a lot of times the women come in and we're all sexological bodywork trained. And with sexological bodywork, there's a very structured process for how we do things. And the big problem is a lot of the women who come to our table don't necessarily know what they want or how to get it. And so a lot of times what I'll do with the women is I will get that verbal consent to proceed, saying that I will ask for permission before doing something, what's typically considered egregious type things, but we're going to explore. It's basically, I call it a pleasure plan or pleasure mapping, that I'm going through and trying to understand what works and doesn't work for her. And then she can start asking for that in the future. So I'll go through. It's like, well, how pleasurable is this on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being, I don't like it at all. 5 being, wow, I love it. That's great. 3 being, yeah, and, it's pleasurable, but I could take it or leave it. And then I get to understand who that person is over time. And then I can get those blanket consent moving forward, because that's in essence what they're giving me once we move beyond the stage of things. And then we can explore. And one of the advantages to our retreats is these women talk to other women. So since there's other practitioners, we all bring a little bit different flavor to the work that we do. And so when they talk to the other women who've been on the other person's table, the other practitioner's table, they learn some other things, saying, hey, I heard that Sally just did this over here with their practitioner. Is that something that you can do? I'd like to try that. It sounded kind of cool. And so absolutely we can do that.
Fabulous. And while this whole issue of consent and how we handle consent and touch at the retreats is interesting, what's also interesting to me is how the issues of consent is bleeding into our mating life. And so another interesting part of this not so simple conversation is that a lot of people are feeling really frightened to make a dating move because they're frightened that they'll be seen as inappropriate. Mm-hmm. And this is especially true with men. And the conundrum with that is a lot of women don't want to ask for desire. They don't want to make the first move. They have lots of hang-ups about making the first move. So, at least in the hetero world, and I'm not quite sure exactly how this would translate into the gay and lesbian world, but I'm sure it's not very different. But speaking from the hetero model, women I know don't want to ask, because if they have to ask for their desire, then it doesn't taste as good. They want to feel desired, right? And they don't want to be seen still as slutty, or even worse, they don't want to be seen as desperate. So if I'm making the first move, right, in my mind, it's not as valuable. Like, your response is not as valuable to me. You might think I'm slutty, so there's shame there around female desire, or that I'm sexually aggressive. And I've been taught that being sexually aggressive as a woman is a bad thing, right? And that men don't want that. And then worse, that I could be desperate, because nobody wants to be seen as that.
Right.
And then the men these days in consent culture, they're wanting a great big fat invitation from women, because they're feeling that male eroticism is not welcome in the world right now.
Right.
So what do you think about what I just spouted all over the place, Dan?
I absolutely agree with it. Male eroticism, male desire is suspect. I know from personal experience, I walk into the room and I'm immediately a suspect. What is it he wants? What's he going to do? Is he going to hurt me? There's all these different things that are going through their minds until they get to know me. We even have women who come to Back to the Body who, I don't know if they're necessarily afraid, but they say, I don't know that I really want to work with Dan because he's got a lot of masculine energy, the typical heterosexual masculine energy. Until they get to know who I am, then I think a lot of them say, oh, well, okay, I think I can be with Dan because he's a sweet, innocent young guy. Not always, but but my integrity is absolutely without question
Absolutely.
what I really
We're just
push.
teasing.
Yeah. And so they get to know that, they get to understand that, and they start to feel that level of safety. I think that what you're starting to see in the dating world is that men are afraid to approach women. And women have been women have been given this message from the very beginning that men are supposed to come in and take control, take them, sweep them off their feet, and I'll go live happily ever after, thanks Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and all the Disney movies that talk about that. And what I've seen more recently is women that have had a regret. So they've gone ahead and they've been with somebody. They may have been a little tipsy because they met at a bar, which people go into the consent behind that or not consent behind that. And they've gone and they've slept with this person, and then they've had some kind of regret later. Somebody found out they have a boyfriend that they actually cheated on. And so instead of taking ownership of it, they're blaming this guy who, for all intents and purposes, was innocent. And I know that's not, I'm making a very general statement here, so don't everybody should come shoot me because they think I'm bad-mouthing all women and not all men. It's an issue, and I know people who have had concerns about that they've been in a situation with a woman where it was consensual, and then the woman a couple days later comes back to them saying, wait a minute, I wasn't really consenting. I didn't want to do that. Well, what do you mean? It seemed like you were into it at the time. How was I supposed to know what was going on? And I think whether it was a shame factor or whatever it was that was telling them that, no, that wasn't right, they're now changing their mind and pushing on.
And you know what? It might not even, Dan, we can go back to premise number one. Let's go back to premise number one about nonverbal consent.
Okay.
Is that sometimes what happens is that one party is moving in erotically and thinks the other party is with them. And that party actually may have gone into freeze response. Mm-hmm. Or that party may be in a some kind of emotional quandary about, do they want it? Do they not want it? I mean, there could be no alcohol involved. Just, right. Being passive around their own consent, being passive about their own consent. And because we never push, before the Me Too movement, we've never pushed for verbal consent. We're not making both parties own their consent. And we're going to have to really develop a new culture where being clear about consent is as simple and as routine as washing your hands before you eat dinner. It just becomes that simple. I would love to hold your hand. I would love to kiss you. I would love for you to be naked. How would you like to share that with me? Teaching people the actual words to say, because people actually don't know the words. How do I do that? I don't know how to do that, right?
Right, so, because, we're not taught about that in school.
No.
We're taught how you can die and get diseases and get pregnant and ruin your life by having sex. So we actually have a couple comments on here. Radha says, please feel free to speak without editing yourselves. We will not shoot you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Pamela's question involved what we are all feeling. Really, she talked about what we are all fearing. Verbal communication can help process all these feelings and fear. I think it's really important to talk about trauma response rather than categorize a woman's response as passive. Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's a huge trauma that I think our culture instills on women, especially around sex, which causes them to go into that freeze mode and therefore not being able to give a true consent to things. Women can, and anybody, I shouldn't say women, you go to a bar and you're relaxed and you get in this situation and then something happens and you move forward and you freeze. You don't think that you're freezing. You talk about it ahead of time and say, wow, I know that I shouldn't be doing this and I won't do this, but you get into a certain situation and that changes. That can be tough.
So we need to practice.
Yeah.
And we need to be, and as, I'll just say as women, because that's what I know more about, is that we have to begin to accept that, yes, men want to be desired too. That's okay. Men want to be desired too. So it's really healthy, or everyone wants to feel desired. We just take gender out of it. Everybody wants to feel desired. It's a really yummy thing. And we all need to practice asking. And I think as we as a society become more practiced, like, I would like to rub your neck. Would you like me to rub your neck? Sometimes it's a yes. I would love you to rub my neck. Sometimes it's no, I'm not in the mood for you to rub my neck. And it doesn't mean that I don't love you anymore. It doesn't mean that I don't want you to rub my neck in the future. It means that right now, I'm not in the mood for you to rub my neck, and for us not to become so emotionally crushed and run away.
Right. Because when they say no, it's not necessarily about you, it's about them. That's why, one that I've heard is QTip, quit taking it personally. If somebody says no to a request, they're honoring their desire in that moment for whatever reason. It may be that they just got a neck massage and they don't need you to do that, or they're in a rush to go somewhere. I coach people that they don't even have to give an explanation. It's like, thanks, but no thank you. And just be very clear with that.
Okay, that's great. Very clear. I think I would like another word, Dan, but I always want another word. So, I might like something a little more tender because that's who I am. Like, I love how your hand, so if you're like with this person and not like an unknown hand coming to rub your back, I might like hearing, I love your hands on my neck, but not right now. And so that's maybe more of, we try not to get all masculine and feminine around this stuff, but that might be for a woman's ears easier to hear and still gives the same message. So,
but I think there's a little bit of a danger in that too, because so I know I've done this before as well, where somebody has wanted to do something or asked me about something. I said, oh, no, I can't do that right now because, and I make up some reason why, which may be valid in that moment, but I may also not really want to do something with this person. And when I say, oh, I don't want to right now because I'm not feeling well, or I've got to take the trash cans down, whatever it might be, they say, oh, I'll go take the trash down for you, and when I come back, would you be open to that? Like, oh, shit, now I'm in this position where I still have to do something. Now what am I going to do? And again, you get into a little bit of a trap where, gee, I said no, but I added a little explanation to it, which now has basically said I've consented to this person. At least that's their assumption. And in my mind, that's the assumption. So now I'm just kind of stuck in this place of, well, I don't want to do it, but because I wasn't a clear, emphatic no when I didn't want to do it, and that may have been an absolutely valid excuse. I need to take the garbage out. When I get back, yeah, I'd be happy to do it. But if you use that as an excuse, and I pick something that's pretty benign, but if you get something that's even different, like I know the one they use in cuddle parties all the time is somebody wants you to take them to the airport. For me to take somebody to the airport, depending on the time of day, it's an hour each direction. And so it's a minimum of 2 hours if there's no traffic. And then they come to me and say, well, I've got to get to the airport by 6 o'clock in the morning. That means I'm having to get up even earlier. And if I were to tell them, like, oh, well, my car's in the shop, and they say, oh, no problem, you can use my car. Well, really, the reason I didn't want to take them was because I didn't want to get up that damn early in the morning to take them. And so I should have just said, I don't want to take you that early in the morning.
Oh my God, there's so many ways to say no and yes, right? And I think what I was speaking to is the underlying relationship. Like, what is your relationship with this person?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, so let's say that you're in a love relationship with this person. You know, how you may respond to consenting in a moment may be different than how you might respond in a dating situation or a hookup situation or a club or a bar or a cuddle party.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're right. I think that if you really don't want to be engaged with that human, to be not to offer the crumb or the hope of another time. If you don't want there to be another time, I think it's really clear. You should be clear, like, no, thank you for your interest. You're lovely, and I'm really not available for this at this time. Right?
Or
that's pretty clear.
It could change. What if you were, you know, hey, you know, I don't know, so it's more of a maybe, but I'm an emphatic yes to trying it, and I get into the situation, and then later decide, yeah, you know, I really don't want to do that anymore, and then being able to change your mind. How do you go about doing that?
Hi, I'm Dan. I've changed my mind. I've changed my mind. I really do want to hold your hand. And are you open to holding my hand now? We're really asking people to talk.
Right.
And I think that that's the hardest thing about consent, is that consent is really complicated. Yes, consent changes. You may not want to be in the mood for some kind of engagement with this person right now, maybe later, maybe not at all ever. And it could change. And when it changes, that person may have changed how they feel, right? So maybe now they don't want to hold your hand. Mm-hmm. They did when they asked, but now they've changed their mind. Or maybe now they're a yes. So there's a lot of vulnerability here, folks. Okay? There is so much vulnerability in consent, which is why people have historically used nonverbal consent. Because, you know, he was just stretching, right? He wasn't really putting his arm around you. And if you move away, he kind of goes back here and grabs his raisinets, and that never really happens.
And he says, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to hit you there. I was just stretching. That gives him an out.
Exactly. Gives him an out. But when we start putting words to consent, you know, there is no out. And that's where it gets super vulnerable for people. And, you know, okay, we can say, don't take it personally. But people take it personally because they're reaching out for something, they're wanting to be met, and it's vulnerable. And so, you know, I think we should be really honest about it. So sure, you know, don't take it personally. And yet it's awfully personal, right? When you're the person who is saying, hey, I'd like to go out with you. And you're the person who says, I would really love to kiss you right now. And you're waiting for the answer of, yes, I want to kiss you back. Or no, I don't. And so I think we're asking people to be intensely vulnerable, intensely authentic. And that's just real. And so as kind as we can be to each other in these really authentic moments, I think it's going to help us learn how to live. Like, it's kind of like learning manners in a consent culture. You know, like, you know, wow, I hear you want to hold my hand. That's really sweet. I'm not open to doing that with you right now. I'm not open to doing that with you. And thank you. You know, learning how to be kind And the more we teach people that our no's can be as kind as our yeses, the more we're going to encourage people to use their voice, because they have to. People have to learn.
Right, and I want to go back to a statement you just said, no, not right now. And the problem that I have with that statement is that's not, like, if you don't want to right now, but maybe later, you're not super opposed to it, I think that's a great statement. It's like, hey, come back to me later and I may be open to it. But if you're absolutely a no, don't say no, not right now, because then that person's going to come back and come back and come back because they're just following your instructions. You said no, not right now. So, okay, then that means I'm going to come back later. And I think that's a lot of what the problems are right now is we try to soften the blow for them because we don't want to hurt their feelings for the most part. We don't want to be mean and nasty to people. We want to help them. So, really the best thing to do would be to say, thank you. I really appreciate your desire. And no, I don't want to do that. And
I agree. I think I said it too, but I like that you called out that piece. So there's lots of different ways of saying no. Like my cat does not hear no. There's lots of ways to say no. So there's no, not right now, right? Maybe later. And yes, that person then is invited back. So if we say no, not right now, maybe later, and then that person calls you later, they're not stalking you. You invited them back.
Right.
By saying maybe later. And we can also say, wow, that's really sweet that you're interested in that with me, and I'm not interested in that with you. And how flattering, or however you want to say it. I keep trying to put the cherry on top, and I understand that not everyone will do that. I just want to make it really safe for people who are being vulnerable, asking.
Absolutely.
To be held in the no. Because it's really brave. We're asking people to go against their consent preference. Because nonverbal consent is so much safer, except it's not. Nonverbal consent is going to get people in a lot of trouble today.
Yeah.
So we've got to learn to use our voice.
Yeah. And I absolutely agree with you that people will take it personally and they may get upset. What I read recently that some guy went on a shooting rampage because his girlfriend had broken up with him. She said no. And then he came after her with a gun. Consent really isn't easy, is it?
No, it's not. No, it's not. And I think that the more we have these conversations around consent and acknowledge, so maybe have a conversation with somebody that you're dating. So you meet them on Match.com or OkCupid or FetLife or whatever it is, and you ask, what are your consent preferences? How about asking the question, how do you like to do consent? Are you more into nonverbal consent, and that's maybe confusing? How do we negotiate that? Can we try to do verbal consent? Do we want to do a lot of our consent up front? And always knowing that even if you're in the middle of something, you can end the game. Did I see a message from somebody pop up on our screen?
Yep. So what about I'm not into what you're asking. However, I would be open to XYZ. What are our thoughts on that? And also talk more about the negotiation. You want to start?
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you start?
Okay. So I actually like that if that's something that you're interested in. So for example, in the BDSM world, if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I would love to do a scene with you, I'm really into flogging. And I come back and say, well, I'm really not into pain sensation, or maybe flogging's not my thing either. But if you had a rabbit fur flogger, then I might be open to something like that. I think that's absolutely part of the negotiation process that can take place between people. And I'm not sure how that would. Oh, let's see. Can you bring something in that's not BDSM related? So that's actually where I was going to now. Is if you are in a dating situation, so a guy comes up to you and says, "Hey, would you like to go on a date?" And you say, "Wow, I'm not into that. However, I would be open to," and you got to find something else that you could be open to. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that one, Pamela? That's a tough one.
I don't know if it's tough, actually, because basically, we're like a big all you can eat banquet sometimes, right? There are all these offerings. You don't like everything that's on the banquet.
Right.
So, like at the retreats, we have all this stuff, and not everybody's interested in everything that's on the banquet table, but they want to pick and choose. A fun way of negotiating all kinds of sexual play. So let's say you're with a new love interest. So you've gotten past coffee. Maybe you've had 5 coffees and you have decided that you want to go the next step. I love, if you wanted to be erotic with each other, you're wanting to learn about each other. And then there's that whole nonverbal thing. Walk into a sex shop together and, point to the things that you're interested in. That can be really helpful. Are you interested in that? Maybe not that, but how about this? This could be fun. How open are you? No, I don't like it when you ram your tongue down my throat, but I do love soft kisses. Yes, I do want to feel your hands on my vulva, but I'm not ready for your hands to be in my vagina yet. Again, it involves talking and talking in a way that 2 people can hear each other. So maybe your words can be like lovemaking. Like, how can you say it in a really sexy way? Dan, I really like how you're stroking my breasts. It feels really, really good. What would feel better is if you were pinching my nipples a little. So I'm giving him...
Thank you for your request. However, that's not something that I really enjoy doing. Is that a good way to do it?
Sure. So we're going back and forth. So I'm requesting in a way that is supporting my partner in giving me what I want. And then he's like, I don't really feel like pinching your nipples. Now we can go down a whole other road. So it could be as simple as, oh, okay, I hear that you're not into that, right? And sometimes we also consent to things for our partner's pleasure. And so that's something that we need to think about too. So are you willing to do something for your partner's pleasure that still feels consensual? Like, okay, I don't get off on spanking, but I'll spank you because it's your pleasure and I want to give you pleasure. It's still consensual. It may not be my turn on. It may not be my turn on, but it's my turn on to give it to you. So those are lots of lover conversations here around consent.
Yeah, I think there's, again, it's all about communication and how to talk about what it is you want and don't want. Because, for example, I know a lot of guys aren't interested in spanking because they've been taught don't ever hit a woman. And so to them, that's really confrontive to be able to do something like that. It's like, I've been taught this all my life not to do this. And now you're asking me to actually do it. Actually, I had a person who did this. She wanted me to slap her. And that was hugely confronting to me. It's like, I've never slapped a woman before. I was afraid it was going to hurt her. I didn't know what to do or how to do it. And she kept begging me to do it. And I finally just couldn't do it. I mean, I did a little bit once, and she's like, no, harder. Like, yeah, I can't do that. And so we had to move on. So we have another question here. As part of consent regarding safety issues, what's the best way to bring up STD testing with the new partner? So
just do it.
Yeah. That is so important that, to have that conversation. Reed Mahalko actually has a really good video on the STD conversation and how to have that. And, it's your health that's at risk. So absolutely do it. And while most diseases out there aren't deadly these days, it's really valuable to know the statistics around them and how easy it is to catch them, and just be informed. So knowing that somebody has herpes, for example, now it's not a killer, but it's annoying if there's a breakout that happens. I understand that's painful, when it comes on, and just isn't pleasant in general. And if you do not have that conversation with somebody and you have a disease and you give it to somebody else, they can actually have you arrested for battery. I have a friend who's an attorney who almost did that to a woman who he had this conversation with her, says, hey, I'd like to know, tell you a little bit of my sexual history and who my partners have been and how I've been protected and how often I've been tested. When the last time I was tested, here's what it is that I have. She said, oh yeah, me too. I'm really strong about that, and I'm clean, completely clean, whatever that actually means. And so they went ahead.
Yeah, we don't like that word, clean.
Right. And I'm remembering that exact phrase that he had used. And right. Afterwards, it came out that she had something. I forget if it was herpes or what. And he was upset. Like, wow, wait a minute. If you had told me about that and I was able to do an inspection on you and see that I didn't see any outbreaks, or we took extra precautions, or whatever that might have been, that would have been one thing. And I get that there's a lot of shame around STDs and whether you have one or you don't have one. But it is, to me, so hugely valuable to have that conversation right up front. Like, we may be moving into a sexual situation together. I would like you to know a little bit about my history. I have had X number of partners in the last year. They have all been through protected intercourse, or protected means. I don't use condoms when I do oral sex, or dental dams when I use oral sex, but I do use condoms for penis and vagina penetration, or even penis and anal penetration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've been tested. I get tested at least once a year. My last testing was 1 month ago, and I came back with no symptoms or no hits on anything except X, Y, or Z. And then understand, if you do have something, what are the symptoms of it? What are the percentage chance of transmitting it and how it's transmitted, that kind of thing. If you're really informed about what it is that you have and your knowledge in general about STDs, that's going to make your partner feel that much more taken care of moving forward.
So what you're saying, Dan, is so if you're interested in having that conversation, initiate it by talking about yourself first.
Yeah.
Is a great way. So if you're vulnerable first, it creates a space of openness and vulnerability for your potential partner to feel open and vulnerable. So, in leadership, they always say, do the vulnerable thing first. So if you can be vulnerable first, you create a safe space for other people to be vulnerable. And so take the lead.
Yep. And to me, I just think it's too important not to have that conversation, because it's a pain in the neck. If you have to go to the doctor, get tested, the fear that goes behind that, and concern that you might have. any potential partner, other partners that you might have. Yeah, I would absolutely, for me, when I was in relationship and dating, I would have that conversation at the very beginning. Say, I don't know where this relationship's going to go. So again, being vulnerable, like you say, Pamela, I don't know where this relationship's necessarily going to go. If it should happen to go to a sexual one, I just want to let you know where I'm at with things. And then I would go into the whole STD conversation and my desires. And if we had sex, what does that mean for me?
Right. We have a message from
Yep. So
Marty.
another question: are dental dams recommended for oral sex if you have herpes but no outbreak at that time? I would absolutely recommend dental dams for that. Just because you don't have an active outbreak that you can see, there's something called I think it's scaling. No, on herpes. There's a stage. There can't be a stage in herpes where I think it's flaking that can have shedding. Thank you. And you can catch it. It is, transmittable at that stage. I have a friend whose girlfriend has herpes, and it was pre-outbreak, pre-obvious outbreak, and he had just shaved his legs. I forget why he shaved them. For whatever reason it was, he shaved them. So he had these micro cuts on his leg. She humped him on his thigh and transmitted that herpes to him. So he now has it on his thigh, not in the genital area where you expected this, but it's on his thigh. So yeah, it can be an issue. So dental dams, knowing, talking about, where do your outbreaks typically show up? My understanding is that they show up in the same place. So find out where that is, do an inspection, and yeah, absolutely you can use a dental dam. My understanding is also that people who have herpes outbreaks can feel it coming on if they're used to it. So you can get a better understanding that way. But look up and learn for yourself around that. Okay, so I think that we're about out of time on all this. Any last thoughts?
Well, I'd like to let people know how they can find us. So you can find us at backtothebody.org. And that's where we hold, that's the best site for getting a hold of all of us and learning about our retreats. And if you get on our mailing lists, you will also get information about any special events or other future webinars. Dad and I do them on a pretty regular basis. And next Friday in New Jersey, we're having a special event called Portal of the Feminine, which is very inexpensive, worth flying in from San Francisco for. It's a non-residential weekend event for women, and women come from all over the world to join us for those, and we have a few spots open. And you can learn about Portal of the Feminine by going to Back to the Body, going to our retreats or event page, scroll down, and there it is. It's going to be next weekend in New Jersey, and you can get a great flight into Newark and join us for the weekend and start to do some really amazing work with us.
Yep, absolutely. One last comment here. I also wonder if it's dangerous to perform oral sex on a man without condoms, since they can be asymptomatic, truly believing we have no STDs. Absolutely. We call it safer sex instead of safe sex because you're always taking a risk, no matter what that is. The condom falls off, the condom breaks, whether they have something or not, there's something that can be passed along. So I would always err on the side of caution. If they've been tested, then you can feel a lot more confident. But if they had sex last week and they get tested this week, it may not show up in the test. So, we call it fluid bonded, get tested and retested after 6 months, and then you know that you can be pretty safe at that point in time. But yes.
So we leave it with some last thoughts. Consent is complicated. Ask people about their consent preferences. Do they tend to be nonverbal versus verbal? And everyone support everyone in using your words.
Yep, communication. And yeah, I know it's difficult, but quit taking it personally.
Okay, we'll try.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.